welcome to the Media Roundtable, special edition, where we dive into the secrets of audio advertising and provide our perspective on industry topics, all in service of the marketers responsible for the success of their audio program, what we like to call the Chief Audio Officer. I'm your host, Giles Martin, EVP of Strategy and Insights at Oxford Road. Today we have a special treat. This past July, we gathered about 50 of the top brands together in LA to join us at our second annual Chief Audio Officer Summit. If you've been listening or watching to the past few episodes of this podcast, you've witnessed some of the content that we presented on stage that day. Today, we'll be looking at a special panel of great interest to the industry that I moderated, called Measurement, Untangling the Knot. I was joined on stage by some of the smartest marketers in the business, including Margaux Natiello from AG1, Brittany Clevenger from BetterHelp, Rion Swartz, formerly Constant Contact, Shutterstock, and LegalZoom, and Sidney Stephens from Tommy John. When I look back at our panel, I'm proud of how much it represented some of the leaders in our category. We had some of the top investors in the space, decades of experience, and some fresh upcoming talent as well. It was a skilled and diverse set of individuals and industries too, ranging from business to business, mental health, clothing, and nutrition. We're confident then that there's something that should be helpful for everyone in this episode. Anyway, that's enough setup. Let's hop into it. Why don't we go in order? And Margaux, you start by introducing yourself. Just spend a minute or so telling them who you are, what you do, and perhaps what methodologies you're using to measure at a high level. Like, are you using a survey or a vanity or a pixel?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Margaux Natiello. I am the Senior Partnerships Manager at AG1, a company leading the foundational nutrition movement and empowering people to take ownership of their health. I lead our audio partnerships team, focusing on long-term strategy and scale. And the main attribution methods that we use are our post-purchase survey, MMM, and vanity URL.
Hi, I'm Sidney. I'm from Tommy John. It's an underwear, apparel, and loungewear brand. I lead our offline campaigns, so TV, audio, and out of home. And we use how heard surveys, pixel reporting, promo codes, and vanity URLs.
Hello, I'm Rion Swartz, formerly with Constant Contact and LegalZoom. I've spent about 25 years in marketing across the agency side and the client side. I think I've tried all the things for attribution, but the number one reason I know audio works is because people tell me. You know, whenever I see people at a party, tell them where I work, they're like, oh yeah, I hear about you on Joe Rogan or Adam Carolla or NPR, and I never hear that from any other channel. So I know we're going to talk about data and attribution, but that's how I know audio works.
I'm Brittany. I'm from BetterHelp. Nice to see all of you guys again today. And I run audio at BetterHelp, so podcast, radio, and streaming. And we use URLs, a pre-checkout Heidi How, which is a big key to our success in audio. And we just started using pixels this year.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. So we're going to start by asking a high-level question. What attribution methods have you found work best in audio? I think partly that can serve as a sort of general introduction for anyone who's a bit newer to it, but also I think raises a potentially interesting question, like, is one of them actually best, or perhaps just best for a certain role? So Sidney, we're going to start with you, please.
Yeah, I would say there's not one best source. We use several, as I just mentioned, sources of measurement, and I think each one works uniquely well for specific things. There's nuance to each. There's pros to cons to all. I think a very specific example, as we're talking about YouTube, but growing in the audio space, there's limitations with pixel reporting with YouTube. So, you need to rely on other sources of data to kind of triangulate that measurement. I would say the best use of these different measurement tools is really leaning in and locking hands on that one source of truth when it comes to optimizations, just to eliminate any type of bias and really have that apples to apples look when you're analyzing different shows.
Thank you. And Margaux, anything to add?
Yeah, I would add One of the best pieces of advice I would give a brand when considering multiple sources of attribution is, and one that I think is often missed, is taking a look at your offer. And if you plan on really consistently changing your offer, maybe you're aligning them with flash sales and it requires you to be a bit more agile, looking at mass generating promo codes or relying on pixel attribution is going to serve you a lot better than manually updating hundreds of landing pages. Also looking at what type of offer you're using. Is it a GWP? Is it a discount? Is it free shipping? Is it a combination of any of those? And also, is your offer evergreen? Is it seasonal? Does it differ based on the market in which your ad is being served? And understanding the frequency in which you're changing any of those elements can help you dial in on which attribution is going to best support your scale.
And it's interesting you say that about the strength and the quality of the offer, because I wanted to ask about survey type approaches and promo code type approaches. And obviously having a strong offer is key to getting enough signal with those types of approaches to read it. But I think a lot of people look at, how did you hear about us, or a vanity URL, and it doesn't seem very scientific. It doesn't seem very modern. There's no clever sounding algorithm to them. And I think people perhaps tend to look down on them. And yet we've seen a lot of brands really scale in the podcast space, particularly very effectively with them. So I just wanted to ask about your experience with them. I think we've got quite a lot of experience here. Would you recommend them to the group? Have you had challenges with them at all? Rion, let's go to you.
Yeah, when I was at LegalZoom, we used a good Heidi Howe survey, and we coupled it with promo codes. And I think it really gave us a good triangulation of what was working. I'll give Scott McDonald a shout out because he actually set him up, and I kind of took the ball and ran with it. But we would essentially, track our promo code orders and everything that came through those, compare it to the Heidi Howe survey results of people that reported, customers reporting they first heard us on radio or a particular show, and do the comparison. We always had more orders that came from the Heidi Howe survey, so we would apply a gross up factor, which I'm sure, many people use that methodology. But it was pretty sound, and it was pretty consistent. It was interesting because we saw our gross up factor kind of grow over the years, but everyone had buy-in from the top down, and we even used that for financial reporting to the board in terms of how radio and overall marketing was doing. So we had some good success. I haven't used vanity URLs that much. I was working mainly with mature brands and people that were accustomed to just going to a homepage or direct load. So I haven't had much success with those, though.
Brittany?
Yeah, I think they're necessary. I think you need, your URLs, your promo codes, your Heidi Howe in audio, but also it really just depends on where the brand is. I think we're all kind of, especially with like DR, D2Cs, we're all in this really interesting journey together right now, going from last click to multi-touch. And so we all use multiple sources of truth. I think if you are, a brand that's very reliant on last click, obviously you need these things, and it can help you be very successful in audio. Ask me how I know, right? So a lot of our spend was relying entirely on our Heidi Howe and using multiple sources of truth, and a lot of people don't actually believe it, but we didn't even start, pixeling our podcast until this year. Shout out to Pete at Podscribe.
And I think you said something about the position of that survey in your funnel, which I think is really important. So could you say something about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're just so fortunate to have a pre-checkout survey. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions when you're signing up for therapy with BetterHelp, right? Do you consider yourself to be religious, spiritual? What type of therapist are you looking for? How do you identify? How did you hear about us? And so we get great response to that question. And it has helped a lot with podcasts down to a show level. We are one of those surveys that, potentially very annoyingly has thousands of shows in this drop down, but we do allow users to, type in and search for their show. And not all podcasts are the same. I think some shows, their listeners are just so loyal that you can absolutely rely on them to always want to give their host that credit. And there are so many shows out there. So if you are open to testing and you've got a great test strategy, you can absolutely scale podcasts based on those people alone that are going to want to give their hosts credit. But you also just have to realize that not every show is going to be like that. And if you are entirely relying on someone to, tell you specifically what show they came from, not all of them are going to do that, but there are plenty that will.
And I think one of the reasons we at Oxford Road see surveys or vanity-based methodologies struggle sometimes is just because there's not enough sample size. So by moving that survey into the funnel pre-purchase, everybody who's purchasing ideally is forced to answer that survey. And so you're getting the maximum possible sample, whereas some brands will put it after the purchase, perhaps even make it optional. And so your sample sizes get much smaller. And so for the smaller shows that you're running on, it's much harder to get any kind of clear signal with a methodology like that. So I think that's really important about.
Yeah, and you don't want to derail conversions. Obviously, a pre-checkout survey is not going to work for everybody. Yeah. But, there are plenty of things with your post-checkout survey and multipliers. And, like I said, some of those shows they are going to give them that credit. And you can, I believe you can scale podcast on that.
All right. Next question is about the integration of audio measurement with other channels. Are you tackling audio in a silo, if you will, like it lives on its own, or are you perhaps putting pixels in audio plus other channels in order to get a more integrated view across channels? We're going to go back to you for this, Brittany, please.
Yeah, no, I was definitely like me, myself, and I, very siloed in audio. And we recently transitioned from last click to multi-touch. Raise your hand if you are last click. Okay. Usually it's a lot. So I'm really excited to meet everybody in this room. It's been quite a journey. And so we're in that position where BetterHelp, everyone thinks that we only spend really heavily in podcasts. I was just very fortunate to be kind of first outside of the auction channels. Following us was, YouTube, partnerships, TV, streaming TV. Now I'm working on streaming audio. So now we're learning what that means. Some really smart people on this stage were talking earlier about how we are so focused on finding out exactly where, that person came from. And that was a great method for success for BetterHelp for a lot of years. But now that we've really grown up and we're spending so much in marketing, we're starting to figure out how to focus more on that consumer path to purchase and how all the pieces are playing together.
Rion, could you speak from your experience about that?
Yeah, my approach with any channel is pretty much the same. I think with audio, I always want to look at it independently for optimization within the channel. If I'm working with an agency or looking at internal tracking, I want to find a source of truth where I can see some KPIs and metrics that kind of jive with what I would expect to see in terms of internal performance and ROI, and really hone in on that so that I can optimize within the channel, from a format, a platform, a program basis. But you can't lose sight of the holistic picture. So in the past, I've used media mix models, MMMs, quite a bit, which I still believe is the best way you can get that holistic view, not just the bottom up, not be at the mercy of last touch attribution or a click, to see each channel's weight that they're carrying and how that factors in across the board to drive ROI. So, it's kind of that independent view for intra-channel optimization, and then the holistic view through like a media mix model or something like that, which I think is really important.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, we're going to go to Margaux now to talk about this really around the area of triangulation. I think it's increasingly accepted and practiced in the market that multiple approaches are probably best, and you're looking for convergence between those different views of performance. Do you take that approach, and how often do you see convergence? If things are converging, if one method says podcasts are $20 CPA and another method says it's a $22 CPA, like you're in a good place. But how often do you see that? What do you do when you see divergence?
I'd say we frequently see divergence, and that's, part of the challenge of triangulating things appropriately and giving everything the appropriate weighting. I think it also is largely dependent on your KPIs and what you're looking to get out of that attribution methodology. So while some you're really looking for them to inform your investment, either deepening your investment or a reduction investment or a diversification investment, sometimes you're looking for them for more directional trends. We have found, maybe last click can be really helpful for optimizing against. Something like pixels have been really useful for us in informing our media buying strategy. So I think understanding the nuances in each of the attribution platforms and the nuances that were required for best serving your KPIs and best achieving those is a part of the feedback loop and the internal dialogue of attribution triangulation and how they work together.
Sidney, could you?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. We definitely see, I would say we see convergence when we're looking at the general trends between the different measurement tools, less so like a matching KPI. But I think it's really helpful to, monitor these different trends across the different tools. I think a key example has been, finding an error in pixel reporting when we're seeing different results across promo code redemptions and how heard responses. So I think it's really useful to analyze across different tools. And then I think also when we look at just the different channels within the audio space, streaming, for example, is going to operate differently than podcasts. So it makes sense why maybe we would see a little bit of a different result within the how heard responses versus the pixel. I think, it definitely makes sense why these things would shift.
Any other comments on this question?
I may have a few. I mean, we see a lot of divergence, and also sometimes things match. And as rudimentary as it sounds, I like to look across, all of my different sources of truth. And if I increase spend, am I seeing conversions go up in last click, in our multi-touch, in our pixels? Sometimes a pixel will show, obviously pixels will typically show more conversions than, our Heidi How will, but there are times where, a brand, a publisher is so strong that we'll see more conversions in the Heidi How than in the pixel. And that's when my life just completely turns upside down, especially if it's a large buy. But those, sometimes when I don't know what the real story is, I just basically rely on a trend. If I increase spend, am I seeing everything lift across the board? And if I lower spend, is everything going down a little bit? And that gives me all of the confidence that I need in the channel or the show or, the publisher that I'm spending with. And that sounds very basic, but when you don't see that similar trend across all publishers there or shows that you could be buying from, that's a big indicator in confidence for me.
I want to ask about the long-term impact of audio. There are a couple of, there used to be a rule of thumb that whatever you could measure, the actual real impact of advertising was as big as that again, i.e. it's twice as big as what you can actually measure. And I remember seeing studies presented at the ARF maybe 10 years ago that confirmed that using single source data over 12 plus months period. And there was some new research as well that sort of said the same thing. And so it got me thinking about, we do a lot of work, primarily lower funnel, mid funnel. We may look at some upper funnel metrics, but how confident do you feel that you're really measuring all of the impact that audio is having for your business? And let's start with Sidney on that one.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely monitor the lifetime value of customers acquired through audio. And what we find is that audio tends to be the number one channel that's bringing in customers for life with Tommy John. And so it's really important for us to, when we're evaluating performance across different publishers, when we're looking at that ROAS, we're also taking in mind, what is the value that's going to come in long term. We're looking at this immediate window. It might be 1 week, it might be 1 month, but we know that it's going to continue to grow and benefit us over time. So it's worth investing more in and being maybe a little bit more lenient with what those KPIs look like than other channels.
Margaux, anything to add?
I think LTV is a really important point because it is the host endorsement. And that's why many of, so many audio channels serve one of the main driving purposes of acquisition, but also that long-term retention when, an audience member knows that this is a product or a service that somebody is using and then continuing to use over time and developing that story as part of their messaging arc too. So that kind of goes a little bit away from the attribution, but yeah, LTV is being a main metric there.
Yeah. And it makes me think of the conversation, Steve, wherever you are, that we were having last night, where after the AT&T data breach, you said your year-on-year numbers went up 50%, and that was how you were able to, point to, I'm always in the market, and you get that benefit of advertising that you perhaps didn't expect or wouldn't typically, measure on a regular week-to-week basis that suddenly pays a lot of dividends just for that longer-term investment in the brand and the advertising. So I think these really important issues. Rion, let's go back to you. Away from methodologies and more to sort of internal navigation here, what was been your process, and I know you've experienced this in a couple of different organizations, of coming to accept that one approach or one combination of approaches was good enough? And one of the things behind that, I think we do see clients across the board, and regularly over the years, we've seen clients who sort of always sort of tweaking and trying to find like exactly the right number or trying to get it exactly right. And it can be a challenge because they can always be in a state of flux, And so how did you navigate that?
Yeah, it is a big challenge. For me personally, I've relied on audio so much over the years, and I've seen its impact, and I know it works. So whenever I think about attribution or looking at the numbers, it's not really for me because I believe in it and I know it's just going to work. But guess what? You can't just say that to your CFO or your
I do that all the time.
Yeah, like just trust me on this one. They're like, okay, well, what's it going to drive? Okay, here we go. So you need to enlist supporters in the form of data analysts, people in-house that can really help you. We've said triangulate a lot. They need to help you frame the story of what's working and how it's working. I think that's super important. But I think your personal conviction can also go a long way too. If you've established trust with executive teams, there's going to be times when you really need to sell it through. And if you're wishy-washy at all with the numbers you're seeing, enlist agency help, get your executive team to have calls and pressure test some of the analytics, with Oxford Road or anyone else that you're working with, because when they see it firsthand, and they see your conviction and belief that these things are going to work, that's the ultimate sell-through right there. And sometimes it does take a little bit of a leap of faith or a trust me, this is going to work, but triangulate and get some folks from your DNA team, your analytics team on your side, get them to believe as well. So it's not just you to tell that story.
Same question for you, Brittany, please.
Sure. And I kind of wish that years ago I had been using the different methodologies that I'm using currently. And that is just being really scrappy. I am trying constantly to look for any indication that something is working. Looking at conversion windows in your pixels, how quickly from the time of hearing an ad did somebody actually convert. I found that for certain channels and publishers, 50 to 60% of all conversions that I received in a 30-day period happened within 36 hours of hearing, a streaming ad. That made my boss's head turn so fast, right? He's like, oh, okay. I'm like, I told you it worked. And like, yes, I kind of found that nugget that is helping to convince. Does that lead me to a perfect CPA? Never. But does it give me a little bit more direction? So I think, Margaux mentioned using data directionally. That's unlocked a lot of budget for us. That's unlocked a lot of opportunity because I will send everything I can possibly find to my data team. I don't even know how they're going to use it, but I think, here's some valuable information that is showing me that, something is working or maybe not working. And, we come up with ranges. We'll have very conservative CPA ranges, or, maybe we feel like we're being pretty generous, and using data directionally like that across audio, across multiple sources of truth has really helped scale all of our channels, not just podcasts.
Okay, thank you. I want to ask about getting buy-in internally. It seems a bit ironic given this is supposed to be so data-driven. There's such a big sales aspect to it, it seems. But what has helped you get alignment internally? Is it really just your say that this is a good method and these numbers are reliable, or do you have to work with analytics? Do you have to work with the CFO, the finance team? Would love to hear about your experience driving towards internal buy-in. Let's start with Sidney.
Yeah, I would say at Tommy John, we're pretty lucky that there is a lot of faith and trust within the audio space. But I think the key is really that continuous education with our leadership team. I think people tend to forget just the nuance that comes with measurement. Maybe they're looking at last click and they're questioning why we're not putting all of our spend in paid search. And you just have to continue to remind. And sometimes it feels like I'm the annoying person in the room, the offline person who's like, actually, no, can't do that. And, you feel like you're being repetitive, but they're not in the weeds every single day like we are. So that continuous repetition, education goes a long way, and it helps continue to get that buy-in and unlock future opportunities.
Okay. Margaux?
I love this question because it's so highly relevant for this group. And I would advise enlist a peer brand or enlist a brand that your leadership really respects, who's super mature in the space, and bring them into the fold, bring them into the conversation, because that oftentimes leadership is trying to replicate strategies of brands that they see being really successful in the space. It's not a salesperson, so you have no skin in the game except for hopefully trying to make the space more robust and healthier. And hearing from that other brand POV and that kind of like personal story, it's kind of like a host endorsement is what it is. And I found that to be very powerful. I volunteer as tribute to do that for anyone in this room, and that has been a real game changer in getting that buy-in as being like kind of a clear breakthrough.
That's an interesting one, yeah. I do want to touch on other types of measurement, because this says measurement, not just attribution. We talked a bit about brand safety. We've talked a bit about post-campaign verification. Those are different types of measurement, but important for some or even many brands. How important are they for you? Do you pay a lot of attention to them? Do you invest in them? Let's give this to Brittany, please.
Sure. So brand safety, I could not agree more with what Dan said earlier, which is like we need to use these tools, but we need the human touch. Our audio program is so large that I would say about a year into my career at BetterHelp, I learned how quickly something can happen, and I just don't even know. I did not even know that there was a risk there, right? And I'm in hot water very quickly in the principal's office, like he said. So we actually hired a brand safety manager internally. I've also recommended this to all of our publisher partners, because sometimes blunders happen on a publisher side with the show and some controversy pops up and they're like, wow, we did not do our due diligence. It happens to all of us, right? So I highly recommend like brand safety manager who vets every single podcast that we're going to advertise on, every single YouTube channel, obviously influencers that we're going to partner with. And when we use our, brand safety and suitability tools that are more automated, we let them do their jobs. And then our goal at the end of the day is to make sure that we are not eliminating, too many shows. So once they do their jobs, we go back and we check their homework, and we make sure, and we have found, if we were going to eliminate 100 shows from a list of 2,000 that we're going to do some run of network on or something like that. Let's say 100 came back, and once we go back and we dig in, and like Dan was mentioning, all of the GARM limitations, we come up against that all the time. Yeah. But utilizing our human touch, we end up chopping that list down to maybe 30, and we get those 70 shows back. So we use the tools, but we definitely cannot only use the tools.
Yeah. Rion, have these types of tools been important for you?
Yeah, brand safety tools are extremely important. It's interesting, when I worked at LegalZoom, I started back at 2010. Brand safety wasn't really a thing. Go figure, there wasn't a lot of social media and stuff like that. So you couldn't really, find yourself in a bad place very quickly. But that obviously evolved, and, we were on the air with quite a few hosts that, got increasingly more polarizing. And, as social media came into play and as people got a lot more opinionated and vocal about, where your brand appears, it became problematic.
Yeah.
When I went to Constant Contact, I was lucky enough to have a pretty squeaky clean brand, very well known, very highly regarded with customers. And, we weren't doing a lot of audio and I wanted to start ramping that up, but brand safety was first and foremost a concern. I'll give a shout out to Seeker and the civility score. We were lucky enough to be, on the beta list of advertisers to try it out. Extremely useful for us. We had a very low tolerance because we wanted to maintain that squeaky clean reputation. And so we relied heavily on those scores and let that guide the programs that we went into and felt pretty confident. And, we still had buy-in from PR, comms, brand team, all of that. But using that as a tool to arm Oxford Road and for us to look at internally, it just, made me feel good and confident that we were not going to have very much backlash.
You guys are squeaky clean now that I think about it. Yeah, you are.
We're almost at time. I'm going to ask this last question anyway. And if you all have questions, you can type them into the app now. If you like, I will also take questions from the floor. The last question is about whether you're using in-house or partners to, whether to run models or get tools. And if you are using external partners, what are you looking for? How do they or have they earned your trust or otherwise? Anyone cares to answer?
Internal, both MTA and MMM, and it's constantly evolving.
We've used external MMM partners and MTA kind of with a combination of internal as well. Again, back to executives and people that you need to bring into the fold for trust. Oftentimes third parties aren't trusted by certain people. So, they'll want that internal kind of sign off. So whichever one you're using, if it is third party, you definitely want to bring executives into the fold and let them pressure test it.
Yeah, we use internal with the help of also our agency partners. So
we use a combination. I think one of the key things that we look for more of the audio specific verification or attribution platforms is ensuring that they have a really good relationship with the IAB, preferably like a formalized partnership. That really goes a long way as being the gold standard.
Can we get a couple of mics just for the floor? Does anyone want to raise their hand and have a question for the panel, please? Yes, sir, Paul.
All right, I'll just start over. More for Giles and Margaux, because I know you've worked with MMMs, or at least your companies have. Have you found a way to validate the results for baked in shows where you can't run a holdout test? Or is it still pretty iffy?
I don't know if you can definitively validate them, but you can use a prefix pixel now, and you can, if you set that up with a good partner who's using robust control groups, you can look potentially at the incrementality of those baked in reads in that way, which will give you another lens on it. So that's one thing you could try.
Yeah, I would add, especially for baked in, really dialing in on the exact delivery and impression performance as much as you can, because it really goes a long way as far as influencing how the CPM has either been artificially deflated or inflated, which will help them from that investment direction.
Fantastic. The impression side of it. Okay, so tactical follow-up. The impressions make sense. How are you allocating the spend? Are you allocating the spend and keeping it constant CPM across every day? Do you get what I'm saying?
Across the day?
Yeah, so if you're saying you need a accurate way of impressions, let's say by day.
Right.
How are you allocating, if the read was $10,000, how are you allocating that?
Oh, yes. Carrying the CPM through. It's not perfect, but...
Do you have a cutoff at 30 days or something like that?
We normally do 60. Okay. Yeah.
Thanks.
I had a question for the group just around the topic of survey multipliers, right? So if you're using some scaled up data, the multiplier and what that is will have a big impact. What are the methodologies you all use to arrive at your multiple, and then how often do you revisit them?
Anyone?
It's been a while since I've used a multiplier, but if I'm talking back from like my agency days, actually, yeah, there's lots of agencies that you can chat with. For different brands that I worked on, they were really, really important for some, and they were not as important for others. And that really just, again, depends on kind of like the brand and like internally how many different sources of truth they're using. We did have brands that solely relied on their multiplier and were able to scale audio to be a pretty sizable chunk of spend. Were you asking how you arrive at a multiplier?
Just asked if you all... Yeah, just more out of curiosity how you all think about that, if it is part of your kind of attribution puzzle. How often do you revisit it or pressure test it, or how do you kind of like feel that it is an accurate multiplier given that it's such a factor in like the final output?
Yeah, I had clients that were constantly every month would send me the updated multiplier based on the same equation that they used every month.
Yeah, same. It's been a long time, but monthly basis, kind of pressure testing.
Yeah, I would say we consistently refresh, just looking at our overall sales volume, overall response volume in terms of the How Heard survey, other aspects, just making sure that it's, ebbing and flowing with the business and not holding static.
I would add looking at the participation rate and how any optimizations to the survey are impacting that. And then this is kind of like a niche one and likely won't take up a ton of volume, but it is interesting, is using your survey if you have a open field for like a free text or a predictive text, identifying any shows or kind of putting imposters into the group to pick up on any podcast that might be talking about your show or about your product or your service organically. That is really huge. And because then that leads to a no stakes test, because you know that this audience is already responding to, a message or a personality that you've put $0 into.
Any other questions, please?
I have them from the app.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
There's a lot here. I'm going to pick one. In thinking about MTA approach, do you consider the influence of audio to drive conversions via other channels, or do you primarily focus on last touch?
Anyone?
Both the companies or, all the companies I've worked at where we did major audio, I wasn't really paying much attention to last touch attribution when it comes to audio. We would define what we called either the brand channel or the direct channel and look at homepage traffic and branded search, both paid and organic, and kind of bucket those together and look at the trends and baselines of how much we were spending within audio channels and other upper funnel channels as well. And honestly use that metric to kind of gauge performance more than last click attribution.
So part of, advocating for my channel is making sure that audio has a place in our MTA. I'm sure everyone knows that an MTA is click-based. We don't really have any clicks in podcast. So currently we have been working on ingesting our pixel data for 6 months on podcast, and we're going to be recalibrating our MTA to include anyone who gets to the BetterHelp website, however they get there. If they heard a podcast ad and they get to the website, we will essentially be using that as click data to recalibrate our MTA. And I'm really excited to see how that goes. So we're in the process. Find me in a few months. I'll let you know.
Good luck. That sounds awesome.
Thank you. I'm so excited. I fought really hard for this.
That's all we have time for, I'm afraid. I'm sure any of our panelists would be happy to talk more about attribution later on. Is that true? I don't want to speak for you. I also would. So please, let's continue the conversation. Thank you.
Giles Martin again here. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much to our wonderful panelists. Margaux Natiello from AG1, Brittany Clevenger from BetterHelp, Rion Swartz, and Sidney Stephens from Tommy John. We at Oxford Road also want to thank our wonderful sponsors and partners of the CAO Summit, including Spotify, Seeker, SiriusXM, Qcode, Odyssey, PMM, and many others. Thank you all for joining the Media Roundtable. This podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in audio and to use your influence for good. As members of the marketing community, we have the power to advance voices that don't just entertain, but edify, to build bridges across differences and preserve fair-minded discussion around the most important topics of our age. If you're a marketer looking to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road, by visiting oxfordroad.com and subscribing to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any feedback or suggestions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@mediaroundtable.com. And I can't resist this. If you haven't heard about it, please check out Ad Infinitum, Oxford Road's very own audio creative-focused podcast. It's hosted by Stu Redwine, our VP of Creative Services, and it's the only podcast out there, as far as we know, that is specifically focused on how to make effective, high-quality creative for audio advertising. So of extreme interest to our audience, start at episode 1 to get a better understanding of what makes audio ads work and how they can work better. And then move on from there. Each episode breaks down real, recent audio ads from top spenders across podcast, radio, streaming, and SiriusXM. And episodes feature expert guests like Amanda DiMarco from Veritonic, Dallas Taylor, who's the host of 20,000 Hertz, another great show, and Richard Shotton, author of The Choice Factory, really interesting work on behavioral economics that we would recommend to you all. Season 2 of Ad Infinitum is underway now, so please listen wherever you get your podcasts. Finally, thank you to our guests and to Haley, Kyle, Ezra, Mary Jane, Bianca, Everett, Neil, and the team at Podcast One. As always, influence responsibly.